Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. There aren't many people who can say they've worked with Premier League teams, Ryder Cup captains, Formula One drivers, Olympic athletes and CEOs of global brands, but this man can. Adrian and I have seen firsthand just how transformational his work is. Performance psychologist and mindset expert Jamil Qureshi. Welcome to Strain on the Game.
Hello chaps, thanks ever so much for having me. I haven't seen you guys in a very long time, so it's been nice.
It does feel like a long time, very, very long time. One of the things we're fascinated on the podcast, The Strain on the Game, is the small details of things and sort of what impact they can have. So what is it about the mindset and the psychology? How did you get into it and where did that all start for you?
Yeah, well, I fell into it. I just had an amateur interest in psychology. You know, I loved it. I'm really passionate about it. And I was working in the corporate world at the time, which didn't suit me in the slightest. I've been sacked from every single place I ever worked, 100% success rates. So you know, then I thought, you know what, I chased my passion more than my pension. You know, I'm just interested in psychology. I don't fit in the corporate world. I'm interested in psychology. I'll do something with it. I didn't know what. I didn't have a clue. But I went to a pub in Newark, just outside of Nottingham, and I did a talk to 50 pissed people who didn't want to talk on psychology. And I got paid £30 for doing a talk for 2 hours. That was bloody brilliant at the time. And I was really passionate about it. I loved it. You know, I was really interested. I had a bit of luck from then, from that particular gig. Someone in the audience said, my dad likes this sort of thing. I'll introduce you. And he introduced me to his dad, who was working with Darren Brown at the time. And Darren Brown was just appearing on TV. So I did some work with Darren Brown for a little while, got more into psychology, more into practical psychology. And then I had some more luck. It was a golfer who found me and said, can you work with me? So I said yes, and went away and read a book. And then he led the Open for 3.5 days and lost on the final day to Bernie Els.
Wow.
He was very generous with his praise, and so name checked me quite a bit in interviews and things. And I appeared on the back of the Daily Telegraph and Daily Mail and that sort of thing. And as you guys know, that professional sport's a really small world. So you know, other golfers just came to me straight away. And from there, I moved into other sports. And I'll tell you how I moved into football and how the football bit came about was that I was working with Chubby Chandler, who's an agent in the north of England. And he was his players are people like Darren Clark, Lee Westwood, there's a few players, Ernie Els. And I was working with a lot of his players. I was working with those guys. And so he was having a drink with Phil Gartside, chairman of Bolton Wanderers at the time, and Phil was complaining about his team, bottom three in the Premiership at Christmas, and Chubby said, "Get this guy in," and so I went and worked with Bolton Wanderers, and they did all right, did okay that season. They survived and ended up I can't remember where, but you know, somewhere up the table, and that was my first bit into the Premiership, and then just carried on working in a variety of sports from there, really.
Yeah. So when you've moved into football in the Premier League, what would you say your role is within the setup of a Premier League football club?
Yeah, so I mean, what I tend to do is I try and change people's perspectives. So I think if you change the way in which you think, you can change the way in which you act. You know, so you know, as you well know, Premiership players are very talented so they're super talented. So you know, there's nothing I can teach them about technique. But I'm bloody rubbish at football. So you know, there's nothing I can teach them about football. But I think the difference between winners and losers is what goes on behind the eyes. And you'll often see, and do you know what? And this isn't unique to football. I see it in golf and all sorts of sports, in cricket, that sometimes people are of a similar standard, so technically the same, but someone else performs substantially better. You know, and the reason why is because talent is not enough. So it's talent and teachability. You know, it's the ability to take your talent and invest in it in a particular way, which maximizes your potential. And so what I try to do is I try to move people outside of their existing way of thinking. So people have a viewpoint. They'll have a viewpoint on the team. They'll have a viewpoint on how they play the game. They'll have a viewpoint about the opposition, playing conditions. If you can change their opinion on things, the way in which they see things, then they might choose to use their skill sets in a different way. So my role in a team, I'd either work with units, like an attacking unit, midfield unit, or maybe do a talk to the whole team. But I think the best work is done one-to-one. So if you do some one-to-one work and get people to think about their game, think about their career, think about their position in the team or the value that they create within the team differently, then you might be able to get some more out of them. And the other thing I'll add to that is that, if you're in a Premiership, I mean, the difference between finishing halfway up the table, and being in the bottom three, being relegated, is not much at all. So you don't need to necessarily get all your players firing. If you can get 3 or 4 players who, are good players, but for some reason it's just not working. Yeah, so you get them playing, then it can make a massive difference. I'll give you a practical example of this. At Bolton Wanderers, when I first started working with them, they were in the bottom 3 at Christmas. When was that? When would that have been? We've been 2006, something like that, 2007.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And anyway, and it's a bit like an army field hospital, a bit like the MASH hospital. So, I would split them up into 3 groups. So there's players who are going to pull through. People like Nicholas Anelka, he was scoring goals for fun every Saturday. Why bother saying hello to him? So it's really good players. Then there were some players who were going to fall by the wayside. I won't name them. Legs are gone, a little bit older. So they weren't going to be there next year. And then there was a group of players in the middle. Kevin Nolan, Kevin Davis, good players, good quality, but for some reason, it's just not quite working for them. So I used to spend my time in the middle. If you spend your time in the middle, it's easy to take something which is good but not quite working into something a lot better than to try and work with something that's not working, it's bad and you can't take it into good. So work on that group in the middle. They make a bit of a difference. Then they catch a momentum or a habit of playing better, and the results go your way. And before you know it, you've jumped a few spots. Is that easy?
Really?
So
Yeah, sounds it.
in that early experience at Bolton then, Jamil, and you were going in, you were focusing on that middle group. Was there any skepticism or suspicion from the players about what you were going to do with them, and how did you sort of overcome, what challenges did you face in trying to be impactful with those players?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question. I mean, I was absolutely surprised at how open footballers are at the mindset stuff. And I think that, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that, some won't be. But even players like El Hadji Diouf, Benny McCarthy, these sort of players who, I thought, would not necessarily indulge in this sort of thing. But all of them are interested. And I think the thing that you got is that when people are looking to perform better, they will be willing or open, to try a variety of things, be that superstition, a change, putting a sock on, differently or whatever, or be that someone else who's come to the club and, and involves themselves in psychological techniques. I think the key with all of this is rapport. I think if you don't have the trust, if you don't have the relationship, then the techniques and knowledge and practicality of it isn't going to work anyway. So I sat in some of the best, literally sat in front of some of the best sports people in the world who sat opposite me with their arms folded and said, "Come on then, make me better." And you just think it's not going to work. And so, when people are open-minded, and the way to get people to be open-minded is for you to be believable, credible, to be on their side, then they're more likely to try what you give them. So first and foremost, and you'll know this from what you do in sports medicine, Lammy, that you can't just dive in with, techniques, advice, whatever it might be. You've got to have that relationship, for it to be a partnership towards a player playing better. So it's never transactional. Here's some stuff, go away and do it. It's more about what are we going to do together, to allow you to optimize your potential. And, some of the best psychology I've ever done in my entire life I'd been sat in a pub with some 17-year-old golfer or whoever, and you've said, "Stop being a twat. Just go and practice more." Just you've been an arsehole. Just go and practice, and it's amazing because, some people don't want graphs and charts and data. There's sometimes a 17-year-old kid who's earning £3 million a year and living at home with his mum and dad, and just stop being a lazy twat, just go and practice, and because it's almost, and it's a psychological technique, which is based upon your ability to read someone and have that rapport, to know that you're able to say it and know it's going to work.
That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, I don't know whether I've ever told you this story, Jamil, but when I was telling Lammy about it when we said we were going to get you on the podcast, but the first time we met, you did a talk at Ewell Park when we were at Blackburn, and on the way across from the training ground, you were going to do this talk. So we're all driving across, and there's like a few lads in the car, and we're all ringing each other, going, "This best be quick. Can't be arsed with this meeting," because we knew what it was and we knew it was a psychological meeting, but we were thinking, we don't need that. But what we didn't realize when we got there was how impactful it was going to be, and how you engaged with the players straight away. So I don't know if you can recall what you did, but you started taking the watches off players and removing belts and a little bit of sleight of hand. And it was almost like you engaged straight away and built a rapport with the players straight away. And I remember thinking, I'll be completely honest, I was thinking, I don't need this. I'm absolutely fine. But then you were in the next day and I knocked on your door straight away, because straight away I thought, this guy's very interesting and someone who I think I can work with. And I always talk about it now, and I've spoke about it on this podcast and spoke about it in the media. I regret when I moved to Aston Villa not staying in touch with you for longer, because I felt you were a huge part in me getting in the England setup, getting my move to Aston Villa, getting better as a player. And I honestly felt I regressed after not being in touch with you after that.
It's very kind. Did you get your watch back?
No. I think it's on your wrist now.
There you go. I'll send it back. I will post it. But just to qualify for Lammy, I did actually give all the watches back. All right. But it's really kind of you to say that. And I think that, it proves a couple of things. That, one, I think that rapport is key. It's really hard to work with someone who doesn't want to work with you. I'm not interested. I don't want to do it. And I tell you what, I've probably turned down more players than I've worked with. So, when there's some players who are really keen, they're really open-minded, it's great. But, you can help with that by creating that rapport. And you're right. The first thing I did was some magic tricks, because people had me to laugh and we had a giggle, and no doubt took the pee out the gaffer. And Big Sam, and it was a bit of it's a way of which you create that relationship, so you can change a mood quite quickly when you tell a story or, you engage in a particular way. And then what you've got to do is you've got to get results quickly. So, people come and see you, and you give them stuff and they come away thinking, do you know what? That's really useful. I haven't thought of that before. Or I'm going to use that actually. And when they start doing that sort of thing, it's almost a proof point, and you almost want the proof points to allow people then to want to come back and work with you some more. So I think create the rapport. Then look at proof points. Create the evidence, and and then stay on people's side. Be on their side. If people, I think that I think that businesses, have been built on silicon, have been built on real estate, capital, all sorts. I think the next businesses will be built on trust. And I think that, people trusting people is the way forward. And we lost trust in, I don't want to go into a rant now, but we lost trust in governments and brands and organizations, but we haven't lost trust in people, in individuals. And I think that, if you can be on someone's side, I'm here for you. How can we work together so you can get the most out your game or career?
Yeah.
I think it's a big thing.
Yeah. So when you go into a football club then, and say if I'm knocking on your door and I know you're in the building, how do you manage how much time you give to people and how much because you are a one-man band effectively, aren't you?
I am.
And is there room for, well, how do I say this? So more players, I think, need access to psychologists, but then your mindset might be different to another psychologist. How do you integrate more psychology within a football club or within an environment?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that, ultimately it's always about the players. So, so some players need different things. And, so some people might need to focus more. Some people might need to have different targets, set different goals. Some people might need to focus less, too intense. You'll probably know all of these players. You've probably played with them all, and there's some who are just like a bit too, maybe a bit too aggressive, and so therefore need to sort of think more, either be more impulsive. And I think that, when you sit in front of someone, the key is a bit like a tailor's adage, so tailors say measure twice, cut once. And I think that you get it right once you spend proper time having a good conversation with someone and understanding what's going to move the dial. In regard to where I spend time, I don't think it's about time management anymore. I think it's about energy management, and you manage your energy into a space where you create most impact and most value. So, you've got 11 players where would you create most impact and most value? So a bit like the Army Field Hospital, the MASH hospital, I always chose that group in the middle, you
Yeah.
know, because two things happen. No, I think you're better. But it's exactly the same when I do change programs in organizations, by the way. You're working with a group of salespeople or leaders or whatever. You're almost better off to energize the people who get it than to try and convince the people who don't. There's some people in a team who don't want to be with. They don't want to play for the new manager. They don't believe in the pattern of play. They don't want to They don't believe in where they're at in their career. Yeah, in a way, you're almost better off not trying to spend your energy trying to convince these people to be different. There's some players who really want to play well and they're committed and talented, but for some reason it's not working for them. And they're the ones that you can make the big difference with, and it's actually easier to work with them because again there's that willingness to partner with you.
So what's it look like from a staff aspect? Because obviously I know, Lammy, you've worked with Jamil at close hand, and how do you deal with, or how do you talk to your staff, and how's your relationship with the manager work as well?
Yeah, so for me, and I know what Lammy will say on this actually, but for me, I mean, I'm trying to think about the clubs I worked at, really. I mean, I work with some players now. I'm also doing clubs, but I was always there for the staff. If the staff wanted to talk or the staff wanted to engage, always there. You are better off working systemically, so you are better off working with your coaching staff or fitness people, to put together a program, in regard to where people are at. I work with Stephen Reed, who had a bad knee injury, he's coming back. And you're almost better off, working with, as a team of people, on what's needed. Now, if it's a knee injury or something, there's not a lot I can do, but I can talk about visualization techniques. I can talk about being resilient in your mind because it's hard when you're not playing. I can talk about, setting goals for when you're back. And so the variety of things that I can be involved in, I think that, the problem that I have, is sometimes you just don't get enough time, so you almost make do. But otherwise, with psychology, it shouldn't be a standalone skill set. It should be something which works in tandem with, like, experts like Lammy, and that's the way it should work.
Yeah. I think the one of the interesting things was when we were talking, well, we've spoke before on the podcast, is that psychological sort of boundary or problem when players get long-term injuries. And you just
Yes.
spoke about Stephen Reed there, and how impactful that can be long-term as well, and how difficult that is actually to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a few players. I mean, so I worked with Mason Mount when he moved from Chelsea to Manchester United. Yeah, who got injured and injured and injured and injured again. Yeah, so I think that it can be really difficult, and you see a difference in how people react to it. So ultimately, when you play Premiership football, it's a bit like Formula One. When you work with Formula One drivers, they've been doing driving since they were 4 or 5. In a way, they know it well. You don't get to that standard without being mentally good. And same with the Premiership. You don't get to a standard that high and international football without, being good mentally.
Yeah.
So, you can you can see some people deal with it differently, but those who are at the top of their game, will be able to reframe it, see it in a particular way, which still allows them to perform, still allow them to rehabilitate, practice. Someone like Mason has got the mindset of a champion. That he particularly disappointing it would have been for him at that time, but has come back so strong that I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in the England setup again.
Very true.
Hopefully soon. And that's after after the sort of season or so that he's had.
Yeah.
You spoke. I mean, we worked together closely, Jamil, on a number of players, and I'm interested in the difference between long-term injuries, one injury, say an ACL, and we know the player's going to be out for 12 months, and it's that single injury, versus recurring injuries, maybe
Yes.
those little hamstring strains that the player, as they come back, in my experience, there's an element of fear that this is going to happen, and that affects the performance. Is there a difference in your approach between the two different types of injuries, or is it based more on the individual athlete, player, and the characteristics that they have?
Both, really. There is a difference, but and again, individuals will handle those things, in a different way. I think that the interesting thing with recurring injuries, which for me is the hardest thing to deal with sometimes, because people lose confidence, so they play within themselves. So they're motivated by what they don't want to happen, not what they want to happen. So I don't want to get injured. You know what I mean? It's a bit like, I remember it was Nicholas Anelka. I'm sure it's Nicholas Anelka, who said to me, he said, as a player, you need to decide whether you play for the cheers or play to avoid the boos. So you make your choice basically, and in a way, I always think that people are either motivated by what they're seeking to achieve and create, or they're motivated by what they're seeking to avoid. And lots of people with recurring injuries are motivated by what they wish to avoid. You almost get to a point sometimes where people are thinking, I just, I want to have a run of games. I want to play well, but I want to run of games I want to be injury free for a while. So therefore they play within themselves. They're contained, so, and I think being a good footballer, being a good cricketer, being a good, whatever golfer, is not seeking to impress, it's seeking to express. It's always about being ourselves in the context of your game or sport, and lots of people who are really successful play their sport in the same way they have organized their lives, either methodical and accurate, or they're flash and, and bullish. And so it should be a self-expression of our own personality. And in a way, with recurring injuries, I feel as though sometimes people lose that personality. They lose that flair. They lose that individuality, because they become too focused, too narrow in the way in which they're looking at what success is. And success is, do you know what, I'll get through this month or get through this quarter injury-free, I'll be happy. And I don't think anyone has ever necessarily expressed that to me. But in a way you do, you feel that, and you sort of see that people are contained. If people are long-term injured, for me, there are certain visualization techniques, which allow people, I honestly believe, to heal better. Yet, I think the best rehearsal space in that we have is in our minds. And that's been scientifically proven, that, you can either come up with a practical skill by practicing physically, or alternatively rehearsing your mind. And it's been shown with basketball drills that there's no difference between the two. So there's a great story about a golfer who was in a Korean War, was a captain in the Korean War, and he spent however long in a solitary confinement, a few years. But every single day he used to play his home course back in America. And he'd replace the divots, he'd do all sorts, put the ball down, and he'd do it every single day. He was finally released, and then went back to his home course and played it to the same handicap. Yeah, and this is just mental rehearsal, in his head.
Wow.
So when, for example, I know Reedy won't mind me saying, because it's not particularly personal, but one of the techniques I used to say to Stephen Reed was that when you're in the stands, just imagine that you are the right back. what decisions would you make? How would you be playing? So I'd play him out of position just to stimulate his mind and thinking. If you were manager, what decisions would you be making? And what tactics? What? So just to try and stimulate some thinking and allow a three-dimensional perspective on the game, away from sitting there watching football. I'd almost give him some things to look out for, talk about. I'd say to him that have a look at the person who is furthest away from the ball. So try and watch the person a few times today in this game. Watch the person who's furthest away from the ball, and then sort of tell me about it afterwards. What did you notice? What was good? What was bad? So it was just a different way of looking at football, basically. And then when people are off sort of like long-term injuries, if you can still provoke, stimulate, get insight, see things differently, they keep that enthusiasm and that resilience, that motivation.
It's interesting when you were talking there about the playing for the boos or the cheers, and something that's very apparent these days and it's everywhere is social media. Is
Yes.
that something that you've had to adapt to as well? And have you adapted if you have?
Um, yeah, a little bit. I think that I don't think too much specifically about it, but when I work with players, not just in football, they can be victims of, social media. I think that is there much difference what people shout at them in the street or in the stands? I mean, it's probably just another channel, isn't it?
Yeah.
So another channel of communication. So I think that if you've got the ability, potentially to step outside of that and see it for what it is, and then concentrate and focus on the things that truly matter, then, I think that it becomes less meaningful. So I don't think I've worked with players who, have necessarily diminish their ability to play football because of what people are writing about them. Some people have done the opposite actually, and used it to stimulate them into playing better, so push them into playing better. But I think that it's one of those things that goes with the territory, isn't it? I mean, the amount of times that you would heard stuff from fans when you're playing and whatever else, and the opposing fans, and I think that again, it's something you grow up with, so the fact that social media is about now, but before that, before social media, there was the newspapers, and they were writing fairly unpleasant things in the newspapers about players. But I think I think a lot of players almost get used to it and see it as part of what they do,
Yeah.
and if you can detach yourself away from it, I think that one thing which is really a really important point in sport is that failure is part payment towards success. So the price of success is always paid in full and in advance. You don't get to number one in the world and you start making mistakes. You don't get to number one in the world and you start losing tournaments. It doesn't work like that. So I think that when you make mistakes and when you get abuse or criticism, or whatever it might be, I think there's a way in which people will see their career, and long-term goals, as being more important than some of the things that they may be criticised for at that moment. Remember David Beckham being sent off for, that impulsive moment, and his career after that was stunning. And I think that, you can become a victim of what people say, or you can keep your eyes on the prize, and think more long-term.
Yeah, because I think when I was when I was at Aston Villa, definitely social media had just started kicking
Right.
in. And I was on Twitter at the time, and I remember reading comments and thinking, I am the worst player in the world. Because you read, I don't know, maybe 100 comments if you've had a bad game, and you only think of them 100 comments. You don't think of the other positives. You only focus on the negatives. And then since moving into the media side of football, and you still see comments. And I remember sitting down, and I hope she won't mind me mentioning her. I probably won't. She won't mind. Is Kelly Cates, and I remember Kelly sitting down with me one time at BBC, and she said, "Just turn all your notifications off." And I was
Yeah.
like, "I don't know how to do that." And she was like, "Well, you don't have to read what people put. You can just post and then just ignore everything." And
Yeah.
everything changed for me because I was reading all the negative, and then now I'm just like, yeah, I can post what I want. If someone wants to say something about me, I don't see it. if someone wants to come up to me in the street and say something negative, well, that might be only one or two voices, but rather than reading 100 comments. And I think my mindset has definitely changed from that point of view and trying to have a more positive outlook on things like that.
Apologise to you for those comments. I don't know why you're bringing. But, but yeah, it's lost aversion. And we focus upon the things that that we stand to lose. This is the issue. I'll tell you. I mean, as you're talking, I was thinking that I work with golfers. And these are literally some of the best golfers in the world. And they play 68 great shots. Around a proper sticky course, proper hard course. 68 great shots, and they play 2 bad ones. Do you know what they want to talk about all evening in the hotel room?
2 bad ones.
It's all right. It's all about it's too bad. And it's funny with amateur golfers. With amateur golfers, they'll hit the ball badly all day, literally all day, and they'll flush it twice in like 4 hours. That's enough to get them back next day.
So true.
Enough to get them back
true.
next day. But professionals, I'm not joking. The amount of times that I work with a golfer, who's won majors, and I remember him leaving a message on my phone. He shot 70, shot 70 round Wentworth, I think it was, some course in England anyway, and he was left a message on my phone saying that I can't play the game. Okay, he's probably in the top 20 in the world at the time. He said, I can't play. His exact words, I can't play the game. He said, I've lost it. Play the game. Shot 70 round Wentworth. I think it ended up like 30th or something in the tournament. But it's an odd thing, mate. I think the other thing, I mean, away from the social media, I think there's so much on it. I think that when people change their title at their label, it changes them. So people say, I'm a dad now, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Now that I'm a husband, I need to take that responsibility seriously. Or now that I'm a manager, I can't go out with you guys. Now that I've been promoted, I'm a manager. I can't, I need to be like this. Now that I'm a Premiership footballer, we sort of change. And I, remember, I'll tell you a story. That with golfers might make the tour, and then they've got sponsorship deals. They've got corporate events. They've got a variety of things that business managers, agents, swing coach, nutritionist. It changes them. And I remember Darren Clark. I worked with Darren Clark for a couple of years. I remember saying to Darren Clark, I said, when did you play the best golf you've ever played? And he says, an amateur around Northern Ireland. There's an amateur. I said, what did you do? What were you doing at the time? He sort of thought about it. He said, I was hitting the ball, and then I was going to find it, and then I'd hit it again. And the simplicity of it was amazing. You think about the best football you ever played. You probably weren't thinking that much about it. You were probably enjoying the game. You had lost yourself to something which is bigger than you. Which is the enjoyment of the game, at having some fun, expressing yourself, trying some stuff out, and that rhythm and flow. But we tend to lose it away from the social media when there's other things involved or other things getting in the way. When you got a putt for $10 million, which is 6 feet, it's a different type of thinking than when you're playing with your mates, and you're practicing, and you're holding it from 6 feet. So I think that, part of my job, going back to the psychology, is to allow people to reframe things, to see things differently. And here's the thing, I think when you play football great, so when you played your best football, and let's say you had 3 or 4, weeks of playing great football. I remember at Blackburn, you had like months of playing great football, but when you're playing brilliant, and this could be if you're in the business, if you're presenting well or doing sales well, if you're doing golf, and I know you're a golfer, when you play great, it's not a purple patch or it's not good form or a lucky streak. It's actually how you can play all the time. The majority of the time we're being interfered with. So the majority of the time something is getting in the way of us playing really well. So, so it's actually taking away the interference where we can make the biggest difference. Because if you can play great once, you can play great twice. And then you can play great 3 times. But something gets in the way of the thinking, which then interferes with the technical bit.
One of the things we talk about quite extensively on this podcast is how the game's evolved over the last 10, 15 years. from a physical perspective, and we talk about the impact that that's had on injuries. As the game's evolved in the time that you've been working with players, have you seen that that's been reflected in different psychological challenges with players?
Yes, and I think that one thing that I see is probably the intensity. So, you probably see intensity create injury at how much football people are playing and the type of football they're playing. I see it more as a bit of a burnout as much as anything else. So people are a bit frazzled. I think that it's high intensity. It's not only just physical, but it's also um, it's also the public profile too. Going back to the social media bit, I do think I think it's very visible. I think results are very visible. Outcomes are very visible. Data is published all the time. How far someone's running, pass completion. So there's a whole variety of things which, impact upon people's ability to concentrate on the focus on the things that really matter, which is enjoying their football. Because, I think people perform best, when they enjoy being on the ball. I remember Tony Pulis used to say it quite a lot. I did some work at Stoke City when they were in the Premiership, and Tony Pulis used to say, enjoy being on the ball. He does his thing, enjoy being on the ball. And I think that there's almost less enjoyment when you are playing relentlessly at a high intensity, with a lot at stake, and I think that, the players who I sometimes work with, end up in a position, where focusing for long periods is hard work. So when I speak to business people, and I say to business people, how do you get the most out yourself? And what would you do to get more done? And they say, oh, give me an extra pair of hands, or give me more hours in a day. And when I speak to super performers, people who perform at the very, very highest level, so these are astronauts, fighter pilots, medical teams who do these 8-hour operations, and you say to them, how would you perform better? They all say, take more time out. If I had more time out, I would perform better. So, this thing about, to get more done, you need to take more time out. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's absolutely true. Rest and recovery is really important. And when you think about players that, they do rest and recover physically, but do they rest and recover mentally? Probably nowhere near as much, because they'll have football on in the house and they'll watch another game in their league and they'll think about it, and they'll have a look at the videos that were sent to them that night from the game the day before. So I think that there's a relentlessness about it, which in any job, but if it's something which you're doing a lot, and people think that, football, it's 90 minutes on a Saturday, and some training. It's not. There's a load to it. Because don't forget that players are also meeting with their agents and are meeting with their sponsors, and they're doing corporate work and whatever else. So, it's probably more full time than even they realize. Now, and I think that, I've sat with players before. Now, some players, I remember being abroad pre-season, and I sat with a player on his bed at like midnight who was talking about football, and the reason why was because a doctor had called me in saying he's proper wired about it, can't go to sleep. Can you go and literally talk him down? It's midnight, he's talking about football, and frazzled. And I think that, so what I do see, in answer to your question, I do see an intensity in the way in which people think about it, which is probably not good. It probably is detrimental to the way in which they perform.
I think I was one of those people. I'm definitely an overthinker about the game, an overthinker about
Yeah.
how you'd set up. And I don't know whether you recall this, and I've told this story a few times, where we were away at Fulham and you said to me, I want to do some work with you tonight. And you're going to get ready for bed, and you're going to lie in your bed, and I'm going to sit in a chair and talk about the game tomorrow. And it was this
I can't
thought
believe you
process.
fell for that.
Yeah. Well, the worst part about this story is when I finished the story is that I woke up the next morning and you're gone. And I was like, it felt very strange. I woke up and
Yeah, but
it was
It's
Yeah,
better
it
than
was.
I'd gone than you found me next year, wouldn't it? Surely.
Yeah, it
Did
was.
he at least leave his phone number?
No, he didn't. This is the first time I've seen him since. Yeah.
But do you know what? But you know what? You played great in that game. You won the game for us.
Well, that was the best. That felt like the best game of football I'd ever played. But I felt
Yeah,
so
I
prepared
remember it
for
very
it,
well.
but
You played
also
amazing.
so relaxed about going into the game because I felt like every process had been hit. And do you know my only downside to it was I felt like I had to replicate that every single time then. I mean, not the
Yeah,
performance, the process. And it was almost
yeah,
like this sounds very weird, but I was almost lost without you because I didn't know how to replicate it. I didn't know how to find that again on my own. And it was like, I need that. And it was almost like a craving for it where I didn't know how to
yeah,
formulate that process again. So thanks
yeah.
for that
Well, that's
because I
my
couldn't get it
fault
back.
then. You know, I think, do you know what? It's funny actually, and this is a separate point, but I'll make it, because it might be helpful to someone out there who's playing a sport. But yeah, when players look for perfection, and golf is a good example of this actually. When people look for perfection, two things happen. Yeah, they either find it and then worry about when they're going to lose it, or they end up never finding it. So, it's one of those things which is called an asymptote. It's one of those things which are, it's not the thing to be looking for, but what should happen with a good psychologist, so is that, you give someone some techniques and some stuff which works, and then you give them the things that they can do on their own. So it's not something which is dependent. You make people independent, in fact. So that's my fault, and I apologize for it.
No, you did.
But
The thing is, you did give me the techniques, but I think sometimes there's just a doubt where you go, "Am I doing it right? Is that going to work? Is that the right process?" I mean, that's my personality, so that's my fault in myself, and I often do that now. If I go for a golf lesson, I walk away from the golf lesson and feel great, and then sometimes I'll think, "Did he say that or did he say that?" And I'll doubt myself, and that's just my own
yeah, yeah,
personality and my own traits. So it's definitely nothing to do with you, but that's just the sort of the mental side of it that I struggle with is making sure that I'm correct in what I'm doing and that I'm actually following what the process is. So that's part and parcel
yeah.
of the way I try to deal with it.
I think the key to this is obviously make things really practical for people and really simple. So the more simple the better, because then people can just get it, and think that is the right way to do it. And also, the key with this is to allow people to personally interpret it. So 70-30% communication. If you see like a Guinness advert is a good example of this actually. When you see a Guinness advert, it doesn't give you the full message. It's something you work out. It gives you 70% of the message, and then 30% of it you work out yourself. And then you feel clever because you worked it out. But it's also your own interpretation of it too. So someone else might see it slightly differently. So, and again, with some techniques that you can either give people some real practicality, which is really simple, or alternatively, I'll give you an example of that. But, or alternatively, you can give people some stuff that they interpret, that they translate, and that way they make it their own. And so therefore there isn't so much doubt because they're the ones who've taken it and worked with it and made it something that is relevant to them. So Gary Speed, I give this example quite a lot when I talk actually. So Speedo, God love him, had his technique on penalties. I don't know if you've heard it. I might have mentioned it before. So Speedo is a world class penalty taker, at absolute world class. And if you look at his stats, and whenever you asked him or talked about penalties, he'd always say that, when I know I'm going to take a penalty, he said, I ask myself a question. I'll never forget him telling me this, actually. And he said, I asked myself a question. He said, I put the question on loop and it repeats in my head, but I don't answer it. He said, as I run towards the ball, I'm probably, I don't know, 2 strides away from kicking the ball. He said, the answer just comes to me. An 11 pace run up, 11 steps and 2 steps away from kicking the ball, the answer would pop into his head. And the question that he used to ask himself before each penalty was, which way will I run, left or right, to celebrate having scored this goal?
Brilliant.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it's a binary technique. It's very simple. Don't you would literally think, now, which way will I run, left or right, to celebrate, having scored this goal,
Class.
and then, so, one, it's motivated by what you're seeking to achieve, not by what you want to avoid. Don't miss this one. Don't hit it at the goalkeeper. Don't hit it over the crossbar. So it's motivated by what you want to achieve. Secondly, it's a lovely distraction technique because you're not thinking about anything else. You're repeating something to yourself like a mantra, and it's overwhelmingly positive, isn't it? This is why sometimes, I'm not joking, that you would see Speedo take a penalty. I probably saw him take, well, no, maybe 3 or 4, but you'd see him like kick the ball, and he almost like seemed to go to celebrate as the goal, as it was saved. It's like he's going to go up to celebrate, and the goal saved it.
Brilliant. Love it.
Jamil, we've spoken a lot about the support you give to players, but obviously you provide a lot of support to staff as well, and staff come under incredible pressures and
Yeah.
scrutiny. Could you just describe to the listeners the way that you approach that, and how you might manage groups of staff with within different departments?
Yeah, I think that, a few things. That one, cross-functional working is really important, a systemic approach to, player health and well-being. So, get people collaborating more, working together more. So talk about, team at so, as a team, and this is what a high-performing team looks like. So you can share some ideas and some thoughts, on how people might connect, collaborate, cooperate better. On the whole, they do. And so on the whole, they do. You can certainly be there for when people, want to put some psychology into their treatments. So, how do I get this player doing this? He's not doing it, or, he's not committing to something, and it might be something to do with diet, for example. Yeah, so there might be a player who's just not eating the right stuff and doing the right stuff. And how do we change it? So, so you can give them some psychological techniques or psychological support that they can, here's an approach you might want to try with this player. Here's something that, might get this player thinking differently. Why don't you position it like this? So you can offer support in that way. And you clearly can, offer your support in regard to some of the stress and strain that some of the staff members go through, and I think that there's a huge amount of pressure on you boys, and you guys, do a great job behind the scenes in getting players fit and healthy. I mean, you think about it. I remember it was Doc Freeman at Bolton. The Bolton setup was amazing. Cryogenics chambers, the whole lot, it was phenomenal. And he said that, look, you're paying people 50,000-60,000 pounds. You've got machinery that costs you 50,000-60,000 pounds a week. You want it working. And, so, we need to keep these things working. And there's a massive amount of stress on people like you, to allow a team to perform at the highest level and finish as high up the table as it can. And, and it just takes a few injuries, for that to go wrong. You ever look at what happened to, I worked a couple of Man City players, and I don't, you remember Rodri got injured? Have a look at the results after Rodri got injured. Now, you may, have a look at them. You may think, well, what? It's one player and it's a big squad, and you look at the subs bench of some of these teams, and you think, they'll turn out and they'll perform anyway, and it is true. But also, there's more than just being a good player, isn't there? There's the way in which you fit into a team. There's the expectation in regard to how the team will be playing, how it will be set up. And I think that one piece can be more crucial than what other people realise. And so, in regard to the support for people like yourself, who are keeping these players fit and healthy, I think that, some of it can be just, being there as a colleague, because of some of the stress and pressures that, those team members are under, to make sure they're fielding, the manager is fielding a team that they want to field every Saturday.
Well, I just want to quickly share a story from our time together at Blackburn, when all three of us were together at the same time. And we were working under a manager who wasn't just incredibly emotionally intelligent, but he was very forward thinking, which was Sam Allardyce.
Yeah.
And Sam, the first Tuesday in every month, used to take the staff for an away day. We could go to the Stanley House Hotel, and it was very much like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It was everybody had an equal voice. There's no hierarchy here. And we would call it getting the edge, because it was how can we change our perspectives and change the way we're working and do things better in order to get a competitive edge. And Jamil, you used to facilitate a lot of these meetings, because obviously certain staff members are more reluctant to speak up than others. And you gave us a task one time. And the way you introduced this task was you spoke about Sea-Link ferries, which for our American listeners, Sea-Link ferries are a shipping passenger service which transports people from Britain to mainland Europe. And what you said was that Sea-Link ferries don't see themselves as being in the transport business, but they're in the entertainment business. Because when people are on the ferry, in order to get them to spend more money, we need restaurants and casinos and entertainment things.
Period.
So the task you set us was think about your job in a different way, rebrand yourself. So we went off and we did this. And what I came up with, previously I've always thought of, I'm in the fitness business, I'm a fitness coach, and everything's one-way traffic communication-wise. I'm telling the players what to do. And what I realized through this task that you set us was, I'm in the service industry. The players are my customers. And when you think about it, and when you encouraged us to think about things from a different perspective, that changed everything for me. That genuinely was an inflection point in my career, because I've got to do a sales job with the players. I've got to do customer service. I've got to get them to buy into what I'm selling.
Yeah.
And when we do that, it's so much more powerful. So that's just an example of the way, and that's 15 years ago. So hopefully you're not going to send me an invoice now for the work that you did.
No, I've still got your watch from that session.
From Peter Jackson, the jewelers.
Do you know? And I think it's really important. I think we lose sight of, the value that we create for other people. So we tend to define ourselves by our job title, our job role, our job description, but that's wrong. And because what defines you confines you. And we see ourselves as this. I remember Warney in the game at Fulham, where he didn't play like a left back. And he played a variety of attacking roles that day. You scored that day, mate, didn't you?
No, Mark Schwarzer saved 3, which were in the top corner.
Is that right?
But I'll never forget it. I remember making a goal line saving challenge, and I'd actually thought about that the night before, but yeah.
Did you? It's interesting. I worked with Mark Schwarzer the day before.
You idiot.
Chatted him on, he's going top corner, going top bins. So no, I think that, once if you see yourself as a left back, you play like a left back. You see yourself as a wing back, you play like wing back. If you see yourself as a fitness instructor, you do some instruction of fitness, but if you see yourself as in the game of trust, so like Lammy, you said, you know what, I'm in the business of trust. I want players to trust me. I'm on their side. I want them to trust my techniques, things that I give them, plan for them. I want them to trust their career, with me. And I'm in the business of trust. It genuinely shapes how you interact with people. It shapes where you sit in a meeting, what questions you ask, how you listen, what you think, what you say, what you do. So once we start to, think about not what we do, but the value we create for other people, we find more worth in our to-do list for a start. And also we start to be more relevant, because we start to understand what people are truly valuing from us, not what they're buying from us. And I think it's a really important point. People don't buy your expertise in fitness. They value, playing really well and extending their contract, or pay rise, or they value being able to pay off the mortgage, or get the kids through school, so they value sleeping well at night, so there's a variety of things that we need to work out what people value, to find our own value.
It's very interesting. So from just a little bit of a takeaway towards the end of the podcast, is there anything or any mental skills routines that you think the everyday listeners can actually put into practice to make themselves better? Very simple techniques.
Yeah, but okay, very simple. I think that what's interesting is that I think experimentation is key. So you can experiment with some of the personality in which you do things. So for example, so lots of successful people will write lists on what they're going to do today. That's what successful people do. But how many times do you write a list on who you're going to be today? And we don't. But it's a really useful tool, actually. So sometimes when I was working with a golfer, I'll get them to play with two balls. And I'd say to put one ball down, they play with this one ball, and so they hit it. And then I say to them, put the ball down in exactly the same position. Now, if you're a brave golfer, if you're a bold golfer, what shot would you have played? And they play a whole round with two balls. One which is the shot that they would play, and one is the shot that they would play if they were being brave, and if they're a bold golfer. If you're a courageous golfer, what shot would you play? And they play with two balls. So in a way, when you write down a task, and you could do this in the workplace, if you had like a meeting, got a tricky phone call with a customer, I've got a meeting with my team. If you put a personality type next to it, one, you're more likely to get the job done. But secondly, you're likely to do it with a particular characteristic which allows you to do the job well. And it gives you some feedback because you're just concentrating on one characteristic. So if I had a tricky phone call with a customer, it's not going to go well. It's going to be bloody awful. What tends to happen is that it goes awful because that's what you think. Or alternatively, you just put it off and don't do it. But if I put next to it, tricky phone call, 9:00, and then I put next to it optimistically or open-mindedly, enthusiastically, you're more likely to get it done. But if you concentrate on one characteristic to do the task, you're more likely to do it better. Because you do it with focus on one way of being. But you also get some nice feedback. You think, do you know what? The one thing I concentrated on that phone call was being open-minded. And this worked well about it, and that didn't work so well about it. So it's a nice little technique to choose whatever task you are doing, tomorrow, and have a little look at your to-do list, put a little personality type next to them, and you can do that as a footballer, create your own brand. Another little technique for you is that self-talk. That's another one that people talk to me about. People say to me, like, oh, how can I perform when I'm hearing this? And they hear all this negative stuff. Self-talk is always on your side. It's always on your side. And we don't self-sabotage. It's the translation which is the problem. So when we hear something, like don't miss it, it's actually really good advice. So instead of go, oh, why did I hear that now? That's the last thing I need to hear. What we should do is to take the advice like it was given to us by a 5-year-old. And we say, do you know what? What do you really mean by that? And then we translate it like an adult with our wisdom. When Paul McGinley sank the winning putt, can't remember when, 2008 in the Ryder Cup, long putt, 10-foot putt. So when he sunk that putt, he heard, don't pull it left. Stood over the putt, don't pull it left. Don't bang it past. Don't leave it short, though. So now most amateur golfers will say, why on earth am I hearing this at this moment? Don't miss it. Why on earth? And they tense up. But Paul McGinley listened to it and translated it. So don't pull it left. That's just really good advice, actually. I'm going to pick my spot at the back of the cup. That's what he used to do. Pick a spot at the back of the cup. Thanks, great advice. Don't leave it short. Actually, good advice. Thank you. Make sure you commit to your swing. Don't lock it past. Well, I won't because I committed to the stroke and I picked the shot at the spot at the back of the hole. So by translating rather than just listening verbatim, so it's your subconscious voice is a bit like your 5-year-old son or daughter. It's absolutely on your side. It's just using the wrong words. So if you were in the egg and spoon race, and your 5-year-old was going, Daddy, don't drop it. Daddy, don't trip up. Now, you wouldn't go, why on earth am I hearing this now? What's the matter with you? And, you would say, thank you. That's really good advice, actually. I'm going to take it as steady as I can, but don't drop it. good advice, and try not to. But if I do, it'll be all right. It's fine. I'll pick it up. I'll go again. So yeah, I think that we need to listen to ourselves and translate and interpret what advice is being given in our favour. It's not a negative thing. Self-talk, no matter what you're hearing.
Brilliant. Love it. Absolutely love it. And that's definitely a great way to end the episode. Jamil, thank you very much for giving us your time and coming on an episode of Strain on the Game. Thanks for listening.
Pleasure. Thanks so much. Great to be back in touch, guys.
Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.